It was a hug from Harry that brought a woman to tears. India Brown had been waiting patiently since 4 a.m.
Just to see them will be amazing, but if I'm lucky enough to hug Prince Harry, it would just be phenomenal.
The shift has been wild to watch. Prince Harry didn't see this coming at all, but Australia made its feelings clear in a way that was impossible to miss. What was supposed to be a smooth, feel-good return to one of their strongest supporter bases quickly flipped into something way more uncomfortable. Instead of cheers and excitement, the mood turned cold, and the reaction toward Meghan Markle stood out in a big way. Rather than the warm welcome they once enjoyed, Harry is now heading back with a completely different experience weighing on him. Reports suggest the situation hit harder because much of the distance from the public seemed directed at his wife. That contrast alone says a lot. Now rewind to 2018 and everything looked like a dream. Fresh off their royal wedding, Harry and Meghan arrived in Australia with massive energy surrounding them. Sydney was packed, crowds lined the streets, and people waited hours just to catch a quick glimpse of the couple. The atmosphere was electric, and it truly felt like one of their biggest high points. And it didn't stop there. During that same tour, they shared news about their growing family, and Australians felt genuinely included in that special moment. Back then, the connection felt strong, personal, and full of excitement, making today's shift even more shocking. The hype back then was undeniable. The energy felt huge, almost like a mix of celebrity fame and royal status all rolled into one. Everywhere they showed up, people were cheering, smiling, and fully locked in. It really looked like Australia had embraced them as top-tier royal visitors without hesitation. But everything shifted once they stepped away from royal duties. After that move, a wave of public moments started stacking up. Big interviews, major media deals, streaming projects, and constant headlines slowly changed how many people saw them.
Meghan and her husband Prince Harry kicked off their royal duties down under on Tuesday by cuddling a koala at an Australian zoo. The couple officially opened a new science institute in Sydney, mixing with locals during the first day of their packed trip. It's their first engagement since Kensington Palace announced they were expecting a baby in the spring.
Over time, the image people once had began to look different, and that shift didn't go unnoticed. While they were building a new life in California and settling into a high-profile lifestyle, their connection with places like Australia started to feel more distant. So when they returned this year, the vibe was completely different. They weren't arriving as official representatives anymore. This time, they came as public figures attending a paid engagement, without the royal structure behind them. No official backing, no large-scale royal programs tied to the visit, just a very different setup compared to before. For many Australians, that raised eyebrows. Even before they landed, the reaction had already started building. A petition began circulating online and quickly pulled in over 40,000 signatures, with people calling for zero taxpayer money to be used for the visit. The message was strong and direct. Many didn't want public funds connected to something they viewed as personal business. That reaction reportedly caught Meghan's team off guard, leading to quick statements clarifying that the trip was fully private with no government involvement. But even with that clarification, the questions didn't stop. People kept asking the same thing. What's really behind this visit? And when they finally arrived, the contrast hit instantly. The massive crowds from 2018 were nowhere to be seen. No packed streets, no overwhelming buzz. Instead, appearances felt smaller, more controlled, and far less intense. Meghan kept her public composure, but observers noticed right away. The energy had changed, and it was impossible to ignore how different everything felt this time around. The atmosphere this time felt completely different.
Buckingham Palace has confirmed that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex will not be returning as working members of the royal family. Prince Harry and Meghan stepped down from royal duties last year and moved to the United States. The couple, who are expecting their second child, have been stripped of their patronages and honorary titles, which will be returned to the Queen and distributed elsewhere in the royal family.
Instead of loud excitement, everything seemed quieter, more cautious, and way less energized than before. The shift wasn't subtle either. It was noticeable the moment they stepped out. Australian media didn't hold back at all. Some commentators even labeled the visit a cosplay royal tour, suggesting it looked royal on the surface, but didn't carry the same official weight or public excitement underneath. That phrase spread fast, and it shaped how many people started viewing the entire trip. On the ground, reactions felt mixed at best, with far less of that genuine hype people remembered from years earlier. A lot of locals seemed unsure about the purpose of the visit. Some openly questioned why Meghan Markle was there in the first place. The big crowds that might have been expected just didn't show up, and many took. That is a sign that the influence they once had in Australia wasn't hitting the same anymore. Then things became even more noticeable during Meghan's main event. The Best Life retreat was supposed to be one of the key highlights of the trip, planned for around 300 attendees. But reports suggested tickets didn't fully sell out, and attendance appeared lower than expected. The venue itself looked only partially filled, which quickly sparked more conversation about public interest. On top of that, some attendees reportedly felt the event focused too heavily on Meghan herself, rather than delivering strong value to the audience. That added another layer to the growing discussion. There were also rumors circulating that the visit may have doubled as a way to test her personal brand in Australia. Some people believed she was exploring future business opportunities and trying to gauge whether the public would support her projects down the line.
Well, the Sussex's soap opera rolled into town this week, 8 years after Harry and Meghan last came down under in a trip they called the catalyst for leaving the royal family.
That's where confusion really started building. The trip had initially been presented as a wellness-focused speaking engagement, but her schedule also included visits to hospitals and shelters. Some observers felt those moments didn't fully connect with the original purpose, and instead came across as carefully structured appearances. As skepticism continued to grow, the overall perception shifted even more. What might have been seen as a strong return started to feel more like a promotional run that wasn't gaining the traction expected. And for many watching, that emotional connection from the past just didn't seem to be there anymore. The turning point didn't happen all at once. It built up moment by moment, appearance by appearance, until the overall picture became impossible to ignore. What stood out the most wasn't just the smaller crowds or the quieter reactions. It was the clear shift in how people were engaging with them. The energy felt controlled, almost staged at times, and that difference kept getting harder to overlook as the visit continued. Even body language started getting attention. Observers pointed out that interactions looked more formal, less spontaneous, and far less emotional than before. Where there used to be excitement, laughter, and natural chemistry with the public, now everything seemed more measured. Meghan kept her composure, smiling and greeting people as expected, but the connection didn't feel as deep or as natural as it once did. Harry, on the other hand, appeared more reserved than usual, and some noted that he seemed slightly uncomfortable in certain moments. That contrast didn't go unnoticed. Back in 2018, their presence created genuine excitement that felt organic. People weren't just showing up. They were emotionally invested. Now the reactions felt more like curiosity than admiration. Instead of overwhelming support, there was a sense that people were watching closely, analyzing every move rather than celebrating it.
An American and British celebrity couple that's heading our way, and some wags have started up this petition. They're saying, we don't want you here, but the petition demands that no taxpayer funding or official support is provided for Harry and Meghan's private visit to Australia.
And that shift in perception carried into the media coverage as well. Headlines began focusing less on the events themselves and more on the public response surrounding them. Discussions weren't about what they were doing, but how people were reacting to it. That's a major difference. When the spotlight moves from the purpose of a visit to the public's skepticism about it, the entire narrative changes. Another key moment came when footage from different appearances started circulating online. Clips showed smaller groups, limited engagement, and interactions that felt more controlled than spontaneous. Social media users quickly began comparing these moments to their earlier visit, pointing out the difference in crowd size, energy, and overall atmosphere. Those comparisons spread fast, and once people started lining up past versus present, the contrast became even more obvious. Some people even began questioning whether expectations had been set too high going into the trip. After such a massive reception years ago, anything less was bound to feel underwhelming. But at the same time, others argued that the change wasn't just about expectations, it was about perception. The way the couple is viewed today is not the same as it was back then, and that naturally affects how the public responds. There was also growing attention around how the events themselves were structured. Unlike traditional royal visits that often include large-scale public engagements, this trip leaned more toward controlled environments, private gatherings, and curated appearances. That created a different kind of visibility, one that felt less open and more selective. For some observers, that raised questions about accessibility and whether the visit was truly meant for the public at all. And then came the online discussions, which took things to another level.
Harry and Meghan Markle have criticised an online petition ahead of their trip to Australia next month. More than 35,000 people have signed the form saying security and logistics for the pair's tour should not be taxpayer funded.
Across social platforms, people shared clips, opinions, and breakdowns of each appearance. Some defended the couple, pointing out that times have changed and public expectations are different now. Others were far more critical, arguing that the visit lacked authenticity and didn't resonate the way it was likely intended to. That split in opinion only added more attention to the situation. At the center of it all was one key question that kept coming up again and again. What has actually changed? Is it the public? Is it the couple? Or is it the shift in their roles and how they present themselves now? Because one thing is clear, the dynamic is no longer the same. When they were part of the royal structure, their appearances carried a certain weight and meaning that naturally drew attention and respect. Now, operating independently, that framework is gone, and everything relies more on personal connection and public interest. That's a completely different challenge, and this trip showed just how much that difference matters. Another layer to this situation is timing. Public opinion doesn't stay fixed. It evolves based on ongoing events, media narratives, and personal choices. Over the past few years, there have been many moments that shaped how people see Meghan and Harry today. Whether positive or negative, all of those moments contribute to the overall perception. And that perception plays a huge role in how any public appearance is received. And in Australia, that perception seems to have shifted significantly. The emotional connection that once felt strong now appears more distant. The excitement that once came naturally now feels more restrained, and the support that once seemed guaranteed now looks far more uncertain. Even the pacing of the visit added to the conversation. Instead of one standout moment that defined the trip, it felt like a series of smaller appearances that never quite built into something bigger.
Kilda Road, we're just opposite the shrine, and this is the crowd that has gathered just in the past sort of half an hour or so. They arrived about 3:35. A lot of them were here.
Each event came and went without creating that major impact people might have expected. And over time, that pattern became part of the overall narrative. By the time the visit started wrapping up, the tone was already set. This wasn't being talked about as a triumphant return or a major success. Instead, the focus stayed on the contrast, the questions, and the noticeable difference from the past. That's what people were discussing, and that's what continued to trend even after they left. And for Harry especially, that contrast may have carried extra weight. Australia was once one of the places where he felt a strong connection with the public. Seeing that dynamic change in such a visible way couldn't have been easy to process. While he remained composed throughout the visit, the shift in reception likely didn't go unnoticed on a personal level. At the same time, this moment could also be seen as a reality check. Public attention is never guaranteed, and maintaining that connection requires constant effort, consistency, and alignment with what people expect. When any of those elements shift, the response can change just as quickly. So where does this leave things moving forward? That's the big question, because while this visit may not have gone the way it was expected to, it also provides clear insight into how they are currently perceived in places that once fully supported them. And understanding that perception is key to shaping what comes next. One thing is certain, the conversation around this trip isn't ending anytime soon. People are still analyzing it, still discussing it, and still trying to figure out what it all means. And when a visit sparks that level of ongoing attention, it becomes more than just a trip. It becomes a defining moment in how the public sees you going forward. Prince Harry faced a completely different kind of pressure during this trip, and it became clear the moment his own event started getting attention. One of the key highlights was his mental health speaking engagement.
Know why they're coming.
I think it's probably really nice for them to not have to do all the royal stuff, but yeah, I guess that also means that they're not as sort of relevant, I guess, here.
Where he was positioned as the main speaker, expected to draw a strong audience based on his global recognition and past influence. But reports suggested that demand didn't meet expectations, and that's where things started to shift in a noticeable way. Ticket prices, originally set at around $1,300, were reportedly reduced to roughly $650 in an effort to boost attendance. That kind of adjustment doesn't happen without reason, and it immediately sparked conversation about whether public interest was as strong as it once had been. Even with the price drop, the event reportedly struggled to fill all available seats, which only added to the growing discussion around the trip. For Harry, this wasn't just about one event. It symbolized something much bigger, There was a time when his name alone could draw massive crowds without hesitation. Back when he was still fully part of the royal structure, his presence carried a level of excitement that felt almost automatic. People didn't need convincing to show up, they wanted to be there. But now, that same pull didn't seem to carry the same weight, and that contrast became one of the most talked about aspects of the entire visit. The situation placed him in a complicated position. On one side, there's his commitment to building a new independent path alongside Meghan, focusing on projects, speaking engagements, and media ventures. On the other side, there's the reality of how the public is responding to that shift. And when those two things don't fully align, it creates tension that's hard to ignore. Observers quickly picked up on this dynamic. Many pointed out that Harry seems to be navigating a space that doesn't fully belong to either world. He's no longer operating as a working royal, with all the structure, support, and built-in audience that comes with that role. At the same time, he's also not being embraced in the same way as other public figures who have built their careers.
To be honest and tell you, I really don't think about them at all.
Are you aware that Harry and Meghan are in Australia?
I had no idea they were coming to Australia.
Yes, I did read about it.
I wasn't aware that they were coming out to Australia at all. I haven't seen anything on the news.
Honestly, no. I did not really know they came last time as well.
Purely through entertainment or business. That middle ground can be difficult, and this trip highlighted just how complex that position really is. Even his presence during appearances seemed different. There were moments where he looked more reserved, less relaxed than what people were used to seeing in the past. It wasn't anything dramatic, but enough for observers to notice a shift in energy. When expectations are high and the response feels muted, that contrast can affect how someone carries themselves, and people watching closely picked up on that. And the setting of Australia made that contrast even more powerful. This is a country where Harry once experienced some of his strongest public support. The connection felt genuine, enthusiastic, and consistent during earlier visits. Crowds were large, reactions were warm, and the overall atmosphere was incredibly positive. So coming back to that same place and experiencing a noticeably different reception made the shift feel even more significant. It wasn't just about numbers, it was about energy. Even in moments where people did show up, the level of excitement didn't match what had been seen before. Instead of loud cheering and emotional engagement, the reactions felt more measured, more observational. People were watching but not necessarily celebrating in the same way. That difference might seem subtle at first, but over the course of an entire trip, it becomes very noticeable. Another important factor was expectation. Going into this visit, there was likely an assumption that some of that previous connection would still be there. After all, memories of past visits don't just disappear overnight. But public perception evolves, and what people expect from public figures can change based on everything that happens in between appearances. Over the past few years, Harry and Meghan have been involved in many high-profile projects.
Meghan Markle's $3,000 a head women's retreat in Sydney has failed to sell out.
Interviews and media moments, all of which shape how they are viewed today. And perception plays a huge role in public response. When people feel connected, they show up with enthusiasm. When that connection weakens, the response becomes more neutral. That doesn't mean there's no interest. It just means the energy is different. And during this trip, that difference was something that kept coming up again and again. For Harry, this creates a unique challenge moving forward. He has to balance the legacy of who he was within the royal family with the reality of who he is now as an independent public figure. Those are two very different identities, and transitioning between them isn't always smooth. The expectations attached to each role are completely different, and finding the right balance takes time. At the same time, this moment could also be seen as a turning point. Moments like this often force a reevaluation. When the response doesn't match the expectation, it creates an opportunity to reflect on what's working, what's not, and what might need to change. That doesn't necessarily mean something has gone wrong, it just means the situation is evolving. There's also the question of audience. Who exactly is Harry speaking to now? When he was part of the monarchy, his audience was broad and built into the role. Now, as a speaker and public figure, that audience becomes more selective. Not everyone who once followed him will automatically follow this next chapter, and that's a natural part of any major transition. And that brings us back to the event itself. A mental health speaking engagement is a serious and meaningful topic, but it also relies heavily on audience connection. People need to feel engaged, interested, and aligned with the message being delivered. If that connection isn't as strong as expected, it can impact turnout, regardless of the importance of the subject. This doesn't take away from the significance of the work, it just highlights the importance of how it's received. Another layer to consider is how quickly public perception can shift. In today's world,
I think it's going to come down to the commercial aspect. You said about brand Sussex. There is talk that she's going to be bringing, as ever, her brand to Australia. I think that we will know, really, whether she's won over those Aussies that maybe didn't have a strong opinion either way before when that gets launched, because it will be in the form of cold, hard cash.
reactions are immediate, discussions spread fast, and comparisons happen in real time. The moment people noticed differences between this trip and previous visits, those observations started circulating across platforms. And once that conversation begins, it tends to build on itself. Clips, photos, and reports all contributed to the overall narrative. People compared crowd sizes, analyzed interactions, and shared their own interpretations of what they were seeing. Some defended Harry, pointing out that circumstances have changed and that expectations should adjust accordingly. Others were more critical, suggesting that the drop in turnout reflected a broader shift in public interest. That split in opinion only added more attention to the situation. And attention, whether positive or critical, keeps the conversation going. Even after the event ended, people continued discussing what it meant, what it said about his current standing, and how it might influence future appearances. For Harry, that level of scrutiny is something he's familiar with. But the context has changed. Before, much of the attention came with a certain level of built-in support. Now it feels more analytical, more focused on performance, impact, and public response. That shift changes the entire experience of being in the spotlight. And then there's the bigger picture. This wasn't just about one event or one trip. It's part of a larger story about transition, identity, and public connection. Moving from one role to another on such a global stage is never simple, and every appearance becomes part of that ongoing narrative. The Australia trip simply made that narrative more visible. It highlighted the differences between past and present in a way that people could clearly see and react to. And when those differences become part of public conversation,
royals who captivated the nation back in 2018. But as Prince Harry and Meghan prepare to return here to Australia, the reception is looking, well, a little bit more lukewarm.
The price of new tickets for Harry's big Melbourne appearance have been slashed by 50% only a week before they head down under.
Harry and Meghan are also experiencing a popularity drop.
they start shaping expectations for what comes next. So now the focus shifts forward. What adjustments, if any, will be made? How will future appearances be structured? And most importantly, how will Harry continue building a connection with audiences in this new phase of his life? Those are the questions that remain. Because while this trip may not have unfolded the way some expected, it also provided valuable insight into where things currently stand, and understanding that is key to moving forward in a way that resonates more strongly. At the end of the day, public response is always evolving. What matters most is how that response is understood and how it shapes the next steps. For Harry, this moment may not define everything, but it definitely adds an important chapter to a story that is still being written in real time. So now it's your turn. What do you think about how everything played out during this trip? Do you think the reaction reflects a temporary shift or something more long-term? And where do you see things going from here? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if you made it this far, and don't forget to subscribe and share for more updates.